Welcome to the World War I podcast, produced by the MacArthur Memorial. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore a wide range of interesting topics related to World War I. This podcast is sponsored by the Ernst and Gertrude Tico Charitable Foundation. From massive national memorials to simple plaques in tiny villages, the need to remember and try to make sense of World War I was universal. Though World War I memorials stand across the United States, it wasn't until 2021 that a national World War I memorial was created in Washington, D.C. Today, we're joined by Chris Christopher, a Doughboy Foundation Board member, to explore the significance of the National World War I Memorial and its place in our history. So welcome, Chris, and thank you for being with us today.
Certainly. Thanks for inviting me.
So I was in DC a lot as a child, and I always loved the District of Columbia War Memorial. And I'm a little ashamed to admit it, especially being someone very interested in World War I. But until 2014, I really thought that that was the National World War I Memorial. But it wasn't. So the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington is also, I think, something that people associate with a kind of a national kind of monument to World War I. But again, it's not a national memorial to that war. So can you tell us why the United States did not have a true national memorial in the District of Columbia in DC prior to 2021?
Right, in the nation's capital. So that is an interesting story because we sort of, the great world wars of the 20th century, which are all now memorialized in the nation's capital, those memorials were built in reverse order. The first one was the Vietnam War Memorial, and that was sort of built in the aftermath of a very divisive experience with the Vietnam War, and many obviously veterans who were still alive and who had served in their families. So it was that whole thing of getting that memorial done, that was really the first big war memorial in the nation's capital. And so once that was done, then there was the Korean War Memorial. And then once that was done, the World War II Memorial, which was obviously the largest group of veterans. And all three of those were extremely challenging to get done. For a variety of reasons, and the end of the all finished. But there's a very small Spanish-American War Memorial in the nation's capital, and there's a variety of Civil War memorials, but there's no Civil War memorial, if you will. That the whole concept of building a memorial to honor or remember everybody who served in a given conflict really didn't exist prior to the Vietnam War Memorial. So that is part of it. And then the other thing, regrettably, is that as I said, each year that went by, there were fewer and fewer World War I veterans, and paradoxically, more and more veterans from World War II and Korea and Vietnam. So the voices advocating for the National World War I Memorial, if they exist at all, were very muted and sort of drowned out by the other conflicts. So, of course, in 2013, the Congress passed the legislation establishing the United States World War I Centennial Commission, looking forward to the centennial of the war, and say we had to plan and recommend appropriate things that the nation should do to honor those who served in World War I and remember it. Some years prior to that, the last living veteran of World War I in the United States, Frank Buckles, had been, in fact, going around to Congress and advocating for the establishment of a national World War I memorial. And connecting with him was this attorney in D.C. Named Edwin Fountain, who had, like yourself, I don't know if you were jogging on the mall, but he was jogging on the mall and went into the D.C. World War I memorial and said, "Gee, is this a national memorial? No, it's the D.C. memorial. Well, shouldn't we have a national memorial?" He got connected with Frank Buckles, and they advocated for this. But then Frank Buckles died in 2011, if I recall correctly. And so that was kind of that. Now, taking a step back from the D.C. picture, after World War I, as you indicated, there were memorials, literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of memorials set up in every Middlesex village and town across the United States, honoring individuals or members of a community or whoever who served in World War I. And there's a huge number of those. but there was no national memorial. And the one in D.C., which was actually put up in the 1930s, or if I'm recalling that date correctly, again was to honor those in D.C. who had served. And just because it was the nation's capital, the monument ended up being bigger and more grand than most. But there's lots of wonderfully large World War I memorials around the country. I'll mess up some of these. The Los Angeles Coliseum was a World War I memorial. Lots of very large things were dedicated as World War I memorials, but there wasn't a single one, and there wasn't one in D.C. So the commission got appointed, had a bunch of commissioners appointed by Congress, by the president, by the American Legion and the VFW and other organizations. The Congress said these organizations need to have representatives. And they got to talking, and one of the commissioners who had been appointed was this Edwin Fountain, who had had a revelatory experience at the mall, and said, we should have a national memorial. And the attempt to make the Washington D.C. memorial the national memorial was not going to work. And so he recommended to the commission that this would be something the commission would go do. Now, at the time, Congress, of course, set up the National World War I Centennial Commission and said, go do great things and recommend all the stuff that the nation should do. But you don't get any appropriation. You have to go out and raise your own money. And so we were sitting there totally penniless. But although thankfully we got a couple of nice donations early on. I specifically must call out the Pritzker Military Museum and Memorial, who helped underpin all the activities of the commission with their initial generous donation. So this was the commission took this on and said, okay, well, yeah, we should go do this. We should build a national World War I memorial. And at the time, as I said, we were penniless. There was the idea of being able to build anything on the mall in D.C. was extremely challenging because Congress had decided that the National Mall was a finished work of urban art, or words to that effect, and say it's done. Nothing else on the mall. Obviously, there's been exceptions to that since then, but that was the situation. So nonetheless, the commission said that we should do this. It's the right and proper thing to do. So we set up the project to go do that, and I frankly personally I gave it zero chance of success. I said we'll never get this done. We're only going to be in existence until 2019. Some of it get finished, but I was of course gratified to be proved wrong. And the whole idea that, to circle back after a long last to your question, the reason that World War I was last is because paradoxically it was first. That was the first time that the U.S. had sent forces overseas to fight in a foreign war that we weren't a party to in the beginning. Great quote by Woodrow Wilson to that effect. And then after World War I. It just ended so abruptly, and then only a few years later, World War II came along, and that sort of wiped out World War I in terms of national consciousness. And then here came the Cold War, and here came the Korean War, here came the Vietnam War, and so World War I had kind of faded from the memory of the nation. There, my own grandfather, who I knew had served in World War I, and I didn't know it until I found a picture of him in a doughboy uniform. So it really had sort of fallen out of the nation's memory. And one of the objectives, one of the successes of the World War I Centennial Commission was to kind of bring World War I back into the nation's memory as a really inflection point in our nation's history and the world's history, because World War I was, in fact, as our chairman, our executive director would like to say, it's the war that changed the world. And it literally did, because everything is different after and before. And there's not a geopolitical thing going on in the world today that you can't draw a straight line back to World War I and the effects of that. So obviously there was a need for this memorial and a justification for it, and it should be done. And so the commission voted unanimously, yeah, let's go do this. And then it was okay. Well, now the dog had caught the car, right?
Right.
So it was like, how are we going to do this? At the same time that we were trying to create for the nation an appropriate commemoration of the centennial of the war, because that really was job number one. So it was a lot of work.
So it's the World War I Commission when it's established.
The Centennial Commission, yeah.
The Centennial Commission. Yes, sorry. Its main job is to obviously do these commemorative programs, education programs across the country to mark the centennial. But then the
Correct.
second mission became we do need to try to get some sort of national monument in DC.
Right. That
So,
was that was a task that the commission
okay.
chose to take on.
Okay. And
That
was
was
that
it.
like a separate committee within the commission that kind of took responsibility for trying to push that project forward, or was it everybody?
Oh, it was of course everybody. You had the commissioners, and then we had our small staff that was working on it. But it was determined by a commission vote that this is what we should do. So
Okay.
we started doing it, and Edwin Fountain, the commissioner Edwin Fountain, is took the lead because he was this was in many ways his idea, but we worked on it as a team. It was
Okay.
if you will the two separate tracks of the commemoration. One was to do the commemoration over the period of the commission's existence, and the second was to do the memorial. So
Okay.
they were complementary, if you will,
Mhm.
jobs of the commission.
And you mentioned earlier that the National Mall, for all intents and purposes, is generally considered closed, right?
Yeah,
There are
right.
no more monuments, but like you said, every now and then something gets in. But the monument that was created is not on the mall; it's kind of off the mall. So
No, no,
why don't you?
it's. Oh, you're talking about. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about ours, the one we did. Yeah, it's off the mall. Yeah.
Right. So
So
it's off the mall. So can you tell us how that particular site, tell us where it is, and then how that particular space was selected as the future site for the
yeah,
memorial?
absolutely. So in order to build a memorial, Congress had to say yes, it's okay to do that, right? And so we went to Congress and said, yeah, we should do this. And there was a bunch of deliberation. And in Washington D.C., there was a plot of ground in both a highly visible and but yet almost invisible location in Pennsylvania Avenue between 14th and 15th Street, right across the street from the White House, right across the street from Freedom Plaza. It was called Pershing Park, and it was named after General John Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War One, and who built out what we understand now as our modern American Army in World War One, and was sort of the foundation stone for everything that's followed. He died in 1948, and Congress decided, by gosh, we should have a memorial for him. The tendency in D.C., and if you go around D.C., you see a lot of them, is what they call the Great Man Memorial. There's General Admiral Farragut on the pedestal at Farragut Square, and so there's lots of statues of great men. But in the post World War One period in 1948, when Congress decided to build a memorial to General Pershing, there's starting to be a lot of pushback. And there's a wonderful thesis. It was published actually in 2016, in the middle of our process of getting this done, by a fellow from South Carolina University. And I'll give you a link to it. His name was Walgren, who sort of traced the whole background of how Pershing Park came to be. And it's really intriguing, but lots of conflict and lots of angst. And it finally got done in the 1980s and got opened, and it had over in the corner a very nice statue of, I should say statue, a sculpture of General Pershing, and a nice little thing there. But the rest of the park was an ice rink, ice skating rink. And the ice skating rink, it takes maintenance, which is something the Park Service is not always great at. And so by the 21st century, the park had kind of become derelict. It was a place where people might like to go walk over and have lunch because it was a very nice little park, but it was also, the ice rink was non-functional, and it hadn't been maintained in a long time. So someone in Congress, and I can't tell you exactly who because I don't know, but someone in the staff there said, "Oh, look, we can kill two birds with one stone here. We'll give them Pershing Park. They can do all that delayed maintenance that the Park Service hasn't done, and they can put the memorial there." And so that's what the law that was passed in 2014, if I recall correctly, enabling us to do Pershing Park and say we can augment what's already there to become the National War One Memorial. And it's a lot of people didn't agree with that. Senator John Warner, who was one of our big, he was retired senator by that time. Of course, John Warner was one of our big advocates. Was say, no, this should be on the National Mall because the other ones are there. But the reality was, looking at the commission, which had a finite lifespan, and looking at the challenges of getting anything on the National Mall and the cost, it was like, this is just really too big a stone to move given the time we have to do it, and given the fact also that, frankly, again, there's no living World War I veterans, and World War I really wasn't part of the national consciousness very much at that time. The decision was made: let's take what we got and build this, and restore the tribute to Pershing to the condition it should be in, but B, revise and extend that into an entire park. And there was a whole bunch of challenges in there, which I'm sure we'll be talking about. But that was how it ended up in what was Pershing Park and what is now supposed to be the National World War I Memorial. But good luck convincing anybody to stop calling it Pershing Park.
I remember the call for design proposals
Yeah.
and then the competition that followed. And I followed
Right.
it pretty closely because I was very interested in this memorial. Now, the jury selected 5 proposals, and then the commission ultimately chose the Weight of Sacrifice by Joseph Weishauer, then a 25-year-old architect. So the design then went through, obviously, the additional review processes and the modifications that you have to make on any kind of public project like this. But describe a little bit of that to us, but also tell us, how would you describe the Weight of Sacrifice as a composition?
Well, of course, I'm not an artist, so hard for me to say. It was the competition was quite remarkable. We ended up with 350 applications from all over the world, and from big architectural firms, and literally, if I recall correctly, from a grammar school class. I don't remember for sure if their proposed design was in crayon, but it was not much more than that. And it ran across spectrums of art that I didn't know existed. To have this, there were some really remarkable designs there. But we had a jury. The commission said, we're going to do this by the book. We had a jury of people who were really very knowledgeable, and they went through the 350. And when the 5 came out, like you, it was like when we announced we had a public event to announce the 5 that had been selected as the finals, and they were all described and so forth. And said, we'll go to the next stage. And then that event was over, and all the judges were sitting there talking afterwards. And I found it intriguing at the time that they all were saying, yeah, this Weight of Sacrifice, it's not done yet. It's not right yet, but this is really interesting, And so his design basically had been to have a whole lot of bas relief sculpture sort of around the park, and totally changing the design and telling a story, which I thought was a very good way to approach it. So we went to the second round, and I think actually the process was the jury made the selection and the commission approved it. So he was in fact selected, and he was not just a 25-year-old architect. He wasn't even an architect, licensed architect yet. He was still an intern, I believe, at a firm in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
he tells a great story about it. And he said he saw it and he said, "Oh, I'm going to give this a shot." In his own spare time, without any real, the resources of the firm, because he couldn't use the resources of the firm, he pulled this together and put it out there. And then he was, as he says himself, he was utterly flabbergasted when the phone rang and they told him, "Hey, you're one of the 5 finalists." But there was going to be sculpture in there, right? And so he had to have a sculptor. He tells a great story. He said, as part of getting the final version of his proposal to the jury, he had to, in fact, identify who the sculptor was. So he said, "Oh man, any sculptors?" He started, Googling for sculptors, and he kept getting back sculptors who had died in the 1600s and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a challenge. But then he ran across a sculptor named Sabin Howard, and he looked at his work and said, "Oh, this is great. This would be good." Unbeknownst to him, Sabin had also applied in the 350 initial applicants. And so Joe called him up, and Sabin agreed. They worked together, and there we were. And so they revised the design somewhat, and then presented it to the final selection of the jury, and they were selected. And so this is really, if you think about it, kind of a real American story. Local boy makes good. and Sabin, who was a well-known artist, but not a nationally prominent artist from my perspective, um, uh, and this utterly unknown architect from the University of Arkansas suddenly were in charge of what was going to be a significant work in the nation's capital. It's a great story.
And when people look at it today, what do they see?
They see they see what emerged from the dark tunnel of DC bureaucracy over a period of time, because a lot of people thought that Pershing Park was a fellow who had designed the park was I think still living at that time, 100-plus-year-old architect, and he designed this park. And while it had fallen into disrepair, his design for it and his legacy had a lot of defenders. And so there was a real challenge to get the design for the memorial through the Commission of Fine Arts in the nation's capital, which has to review all architectural stuff. And so that was a multi-year battle to get there. And so the sculpture went through many different changes. The memorial went through many different changes, and Sabin's sculpture went through many different changes. So once that was finally approved, and we had the money to start building and got building, we were all of us kind of exhausted by the process, not knowing that in fact would be our lives for several more years to actually get that done. But it's done. It was open back in 2021, sans sculpture, because the sculpture itself was an enormous work that was going to take many years to get done. So we had everything done except the sculpture. We put up a lovely printed picture of the sculpture on the pedestal where it would stand, and then the park was open and people could start going there. And then the sculpture actually was installed in 2024. Sabin's work on the sculpture was just phenomenal. It's nearly 8 foot tall, 60 foot long, 37 enormous bronze sculptures. Any one of the sculptures in his whole one would have been a noteworthy work of art any place in the country of the world, but they're all grouped together in this enormous bronze work. It's just a phenomenal thing. So when you come to the sculpture, you get the story of America in World War I and how it changed America and the world. The sculpture, of course, is the centerpiece. It's the storytelling in bronze. But there's lots of other stuff in the park to look at. There's, of course, the original Pershing section of the park that's been restored to its original beauty. And it's an interesting juxtaposition. There's the Pershing is over in the southeast corner of the park with his memorial, but then the sculpture is over on the west side of the park, which is the actual soldiers. So Pershing is actually looking out there at his soldiers who served in the war, men and women, in the bronze. So it's a really, really remarkable experience to be there. And of course I'm prejudiced. I was involved in the project, but it is you cannot go to DC and not go see it. It's a most remarkable work, especially in the autumn when you get the long, beautiful sunsets in the west. Boy, you need to be there and see the sun setting behind the memorial. It's quite spectacular. What you see is not all you get. The commission built a number of, a couple of apps for your computer or your cell phone. I guess that's called a mobile device now. That has all the information about the memorial and World War I and everything. And so you can walk around the memorial and actually learn all about it as you go with your device in hand. You can literally look at 3D images and so forth. So it's a great educational work.
We will put those links in the episode description
Exactly.
so that people can see the pictures on the website of the memorial, but also access those educational materials as well.
Right.
So what do you think is the difference between a memorial that is created in the direct aftermath of an event versus a memorial built 100+ years later?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you think about the Civil War, every place that in the states that were involved in the Civil War, there's Civil War memorials, and because typically it's a war, people died. There was huge impacts, even in the very most, California, all the way on the West Coast. There was no fighting there, but they still have Civil War memorials because it's a lot of emotion and personal impact at that time. And the same was true from World War I, which was only a few years in the large scheme of things, if you zoom back out, not that many years from the Civil War in time, and there was still a fairly large population of Civil War veterans alive, even if they weren't on active duty service at the time. So after the war, every single town that had lost someone in the war would have put up a memorial for it because it was very fresh. The family, the friends, the community, it was very much alive to them. But as I said, at the time, they really weren't building national memorials of any sort in the nation's capital. In Washington and Lincoln, the Jefferson, these are, honoring the founders. But there wasn't really a huge national Civil War I memorial, to my knowledge, in D.C., although there were lots of memorials to great men, Farragut, Grant, so forth and so on. But after World War I, there were thousands were built, thousands. And by the way, that's another thing the commission did, supported by the Pritzker Military Museum and Memorial, was said, we need to get all of these World War I memorials scattered all over the country, get them restored, because so many had just fallen into anywhere from complete to somewhat disrepair and forgotten. And so we actually did what we call a 100 Cities, 100 Memorials competition, where you could submit a proposal to get a grant for a couple $1,000 to help jumpstart the process of restoring and renewing your World War I memorials. And we did that. And we stimulated millions of dollars of restoration work across the country by just giving those grants. Yeah, it's a good question to ask. How many World War I memorials are there across the nation? And the answer now, as it was in 2013, is nobody knows. There is no absolute register of World War I memorials. So that was a project that we took on with the Centennial Commission. And we have a pretty good database, but we're still finding them. We're still finding things pop up. And they're anywhere from a bronze plaque on a wall of a nondescript building somewhere to huge things elsewhere, but all of them are part of this corpus. And so our hope is that the National War I Memorial, which is the national memorial, can sort of be the capstone on this pyramid of memorials all across the country, and keep all of them in good repair, and make them not things that people drive by and say, "What is that?" Well, I don't know. The Doughboy Foundation thinks that it's important that the renewed attention and focus on all the World War I memorials across the country is important to keep. Now that we've rescued them from obscurity in some way, let's make sure that people keep remembering them. And with the memorial in the nation's capital being, of course, the top of the pyramid. But if there's any light shining from that top of the pyramid, it illuminates all of those below it across the nation.
So one of the big memorials in the United States, actually created in the 1920s, was the Liberty Memorial, now what we call the National World War I Museum and Memorial.
In Kansas City, right?
In Kansas City. So how does that relate to what you all do and to the memorial in D.C. now?
Well, that was, Congress told us in the law that they said in Washington, D.C., that's the National World War I Memorial. And in Kansas City, it's now officially the National World War I Museum and Memorial.
They made that part very, very easy for you all. Right. Okay.
Well, once in a while, Congress does. Yeah.
Okay.
But so yeah, and they play such it's just I don't know if you've been to that facility. It's just an astonishingly wonderful facility, and well worth the visit, well worth the multi-day visit, because they got so much going on there. And yeah, that was a wonderful story behind there. And then for the actual celebration is the wrong word. The kickoff of the actual commemoration period on April 6, 2017, 100 years to we had an event at the Museum and Memorial in Kansas City. It was a wonderful event commemorating the beginning of U.S. actual participation. And so the Museum and Memorial in Kansas City is a great place to of course continue the process of the Doughboys mission.
Now, if our listeners would like to visit the memorial in D.C., do you have any tips? What is the best way to get there? And you already said fall is a really nice time to visit, but if you want to get there, how do you get there? It's a beautiful
time. Mostly, and I was down there Tuesday. It was very hot, as it can be in D.C., but anytime is a good time to go. But in particular, if you can make your trip so that you're at the memorial at 5 o'clock, it's a great choice. 5 o'clock p.m. D.C. because the Doughboy Foundation plays taps at the World War I Memorial every day at 5 o'clock. And a bugler in a World War I uniform comes out and plays taps to honor all those who served in World War I and all of our nation's veterans. It's a mission of the foundation that has chosen to take on to do this in perpetuity. And we just got past 1,500 consecutive days of playing taps there. So that's a good time to go. But it's a remarkable place. I say watching those autumn sunsets in the background is really great, but really any time of day is good because the nature of what the sculpture looks like changes with the position of the sun, as you can well imagine. And then it's all lit up at night. So at night, it's a good time to go as well and sort of see it and look at the shadows that are there. Several of the, I'm saying several, I think it's more than one of the tour buses that drive around DC actually stop right next to the memorial, which is right across the street from the Willard Hotel and the Hotel Washington right across the street from the White House. So if you're going to the White House, if you're going anywhere down there, it's a block off the mall. That's a long block. I got it, but it's literally 2 blocks from the Washington Memorial. You just walk up 15th Street and you're there. If you don't want to drive or take a bus, the Metro station is 2 blocks away, so that's a fairly easy walk. And the Willard Hotel, by the way, right across the street, is also worth a visit. Walk in there. It's a very famous hotel that was the site of a lot of pretty formative stuff happening in the nation's history. So that's something to check out as well. The other thing I would say is we have a rotunda in the middle of it, which has a whole bunch of text that you can walk around and read. It explains everything. We have QR codes that you can scan with your phone, and it'll give you links to the apps and give you more information. And the other, I would say, go there when you can spend some time. All these folks left their families and left their homes and put on uniforms and picked up their guns and went overseas to bring the killing to an end, and succeeded in a remarkably short time in doing that. And that's obviously that it didn't. While the fighting and the killing ended at that point, the after effects of the war, as I said, have continued to reverberate for 100 years later, and will probably reverberate for more years, just like the Roman Empire still reverberates to some extent today. But being there and understanding the impact it had on America at that time, I think is important to understand what's happening today. And so I think it's well worth the trip. Another thing that we do, by the way, and what I would recommend that you do is go to the doughboy.org website. We have tools on there for you that you can download for free and to research your World War I ancestor. Because as I ask people, did you have a family member in World War I? They said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you're here, so you had a family member alive in World War I, whether they served or not. And so who were they? And so that's become a really actually interesting and flourishing thing we have as people finding their World War I ancestors. And when you find that you had a great-grandfather or nowadays great-great-grandfather or even great-great-great-grandfather, depending on the age of the person, who served in World War I, we have our stories of service where you can actually upload the information about that. Because, again, there's no repository anywhere in the nation that talks about and honors those who served in World War I. So we're happy to do that as part of our mission. And then on some of the days where we play taps at 5 o'clock, you may see it's a woman bugler in an interesting World War I uniform, and that tends to honor the Hello Girls of World War I. And who were the Hello Girls? The president of the Military Women's Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery is 37 years in the Army as an Army Signal Corps officer, and she says, I was in the Army 37 years and I never heard of the Hello Girls, and neither did anyone else because they were forgotten. They were the telephone operators on the Western Front for the American Expeditionary Force. But when the American Expeditionary Force got to France, they needed a telephone system. And the French telephone system was, shall we say, not quite at the same level as the one in the United States was at that time. And so we built one. And then in those days, you had to have an operator to connect person A to person B. And in the United States, 95+% of the operators were women because it had been determined from when the phones started happening back in the 1870s that women were the best operators for whatever reason. They were the very best at this. Pershing was trying to use doughboys to do the phone, and it was taking him a minute or more to connect a single call. And that's not very good. So Pershing went back to the Secretary of War and said, hey, I need female, bilingual French and English, experienced telephone operators to make this tactical communications network work. And of course, at the time, the idea of women putting on uniforms was a little not universally understood. But even though at the time the Navy and the Marine Corps had female people in uniform, women had served the armed forces over time as nurses and so forth, but actually as soldiers, that hadn't happened before. But a call was put out for several dozen operators to help serve it, and they got 7,000 applications in the first time. So ultimately, 223, get the number right, 223 operators deployed to France, ran the switchboards, not just to have the Americans talk to each other, but to have the American generals and tactical people talk to their French equivalents and support actual combat operations. Literally, we have pictures of the women running out of burning buildings that were, with their headsets on. And as soon as the fire was out, they pushed their way back in and got on the phones again. Pershing himself is said to have stated that they brought the war to an end a year earlier than it would have otherwise without their capability. So they did a great job. The doughboys, after the armistice, got on the ships and went home, except for a few that were left in the occupation in Germany. And the Hello Girls stayed behind and supported the Versailles Peace Treaty and worked very much supporting, in fact, President Woodrow Wilson there, who came back from the Versailles Peace Treaty and went to Congress and said, having seen these women supporting us here, I realized that, all Americans should be full citizens and have the vote. And that was his experience helped change his position on the amendment that gave women the vote. So these operators had a great impact in many ways. And when they got back, the Army says, the law here says that men are soldiers, and you're not men, so you weren't soldiers, you were just contractors. And it took them 60 plus years to finally get recognized as the fact that they were in fact soldiers and they did serve. One of the other things the commission did was it decided back in 2018 to recommend to Congress that the Hello Girls should get a Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest civilian award, in recognition of their service. That was another thing that sounded like a good idea at the time. It literally took us 4 Congresses to get that through, but we got that passed in December of last year. And now we're in the process of working with the U.S. Mint to get the medal designed. And once it's all done, we'll have a big ceremony up on Capitol Hill to do it. And these women will have achieved the recognitions that they should have had in the beginning and have deserved all along.
World War I is a big story, isn't it? A lot of different people all over the world. So it's fun to cover it and explore it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today and taking the time to share about the World War I Memorial. Right. I do have to mention that the MacArthur Memorial and the Doughboy Foundation, we are partnering a little bit on an upcoming event in September in DC. September 12th, there's going to be a symposium put on by the Doughboy Foundation. And I think that is called The Generation That Changed the World, Voices from the Great War. So you want to tell everybody a little bit about that before we close?
Sure. Absolutely. So the new current chair of the Doughboy Foundation, Denise Doring Van Buren, she's taken on a mission to take the Doughboy Foundation from just a local entity in DC supporting the memorial to more of a national organization. And one of the ways to do this is to get involved in the education of World War I, because as we discussed, one of the reasons that it took so long to get the memorial built is that people weren't very well educated on the importance of World War I. So this is the inaugural symposium. We're hoping it will grow and get even bigger in years to come. But it's got some great speakers on the agenda. Mitch Yockelson, but he wrote the book 47 Days: How Pershing's Warriors Came of Age to Defeat the German Army in World War I, which is a pretty definitive history. So he's going to talk about his book and what he learned in there. Marvin Barish, who's the expert on the disappearance of the USS Cyclops, another wonderful World War I story that hardly anybody knows anything about. The Cyclops is one of the biggest ships in the world. at the time, and it disappeared without a trace in World War One, and it remains a mystery. It's a great subject. He'll do a great work there. Theo Mayer will be talking about how World War One education through technology is important, and several others too. And we've been talking about baseball in World War One and military bands in World War One and so forth. And at the end of the day, we'll be headed over to the memorial to see taps. So it'll be a great Saturday, a great Friday, and I'm right, yeah, Friday, a great Friday in September, which would be a great time to see that sunset of the memorial that I talked about. And people can go to doughboy.org website and look at our events page, and there'll be a link right there that you can go to register for the symposium.
And I see too that you have Frank Blazich coming to talk about pigeons in World War One. So that'll be be fantastic. I know. Yeah. So again, Chris, thank you for your time. It's really interesting to learn about the memorial, and definitely looking forward to this event.
Well, it's great. Looking forward. Hope you can be there. And again, doughboy.org is our website.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov, or find us on X at MacArthur1880, or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.